Hello, everyone. It's Michael Jaco with Unleashing Intuition Secrets. Joined once again by Leon ZAGAMI. He's a lion. He's a warrior, and he's tearing it up out there. The last show that we did together was a massive success across all social media. Thank you to everyone that supports Leo, buying his books. His books are incredible. We have been talking about your books for years now, Leo. I remember one time I was like, I haven't heard from Leo in a while, and I was kind of like going to joke you. I was going to like, Leo, let's have another show. Did you release another book? And you're like, well, actually, I have. I was like, what? So you have been turning them out so fast, and now you're like going to break and move to another book area, I guess. What tell us, how have you been? I know it's been a little bit since we talked, since that last show we get blown up, and what have we been up to?
Well, first of all, we have been viewing the first few months of the papacy of Pope Leo the 14th, which we expected to be exactly as he is. And so I think that those people who instead deluded themselves at the beginning now had the confirmation that my warnings were, they are not only about this Pope, but they're about an entire institution that has been subverted. As you know, in Volume 12 of my Confessions, I explained how Pope Francis prepared the whole Catholic institution, the Vatican, prepared the coming of a new Pope that would simply align with the Jesuit politics that has taken over the Vatican since the Second Vatican Council more and more. And that's why this book, also thanks to people like you, we were discussing just before starting, has become a huge success, a bestseller. And there is no possibility, I think, for anybody to debunk it because it's based on facts rather than speculations. And a pope like the one that we have seen in the last few months is a pope that is a little bit more moderate in the political attacks, but is still bringing forward those progressive liberal ideals that are destroying the last remains of Christianity within the Catholic Church. So when Tracy told me, what do you think of these nuns that are being nominated? Well, they are simply in line with the nuns already nominated by Pope Francis, a church that sees in the Curia, in the deciding figures, more and more female figures that, in a way, I mean, if it wasn't a church, you would say it's a good thing. But because the Catholic Church has a traditional aspect, doesn't accept woman priesthood and so on, we will think that maybe this Pope is handling a little bit too much power to these nuns. And at the same time, there is been, of course, just like I predicted in Volume 12, as you remember, I said that the Orthodox Church and the other Christian denominations will just be captured by this upcoming Pope, who will declare himself to no longer have the primacy of Rome. In fact, this is exactly what has happened recently with the Orthodox Patriarch visiting Pope Leo, and Pope Leo praying with the Orthodox, and the same thing also when he inaugurated his papacy. Another aspect of already what I said, the destruction of the figure of the Pope for Catholics, of course, is important. Maybe for non-Catholics is irrelevant. Maybe it's even a positive thing. But for Catholics, the Pope is descending from Peter all the way down to the latest Pope through a papal lineage, an episcopal lineage, which has been always recognized as having this supremacy from, like I said, from the time of Peter, who was the design successor and the guy who Jesus decided to create this institution. However, we must be very careful about that, because like I said also in my book, a lot of these aspects of the church were artificially constructed and kept together until there is no longer any need, because now actually is of obstruction having a pope who is such a, who stands on top while he's trying instead to put everybody back together. The first schism, of course, is the Orthodox schism, but then we have the Reformation, we had Martin Luther, we had the Church of England, we had Calvinism, we had many things that in a way made the Christian family more and more divided. Now, of course, the Jesuits, who were the soldiers of the Counter-Reformation, the ones who fought for the papacy, even in illegal ways, let's say, not always in legal ways, because they act like secret agents of sorts at times. They are bringing back with this new pope the church somehow together, but that's only the first step, because like we said, it's a one-world religion that is coming together. And then we saw also the pope, like I wrote in one of my recent articles on ZAGAMI.com, even celebrating a green mass. I mean, a mass based on the presumption that climate change is a dogma that can't be refuted in any way. I mean, that is pretty insane. And on the same day, there was also Volodymyr Zelensky arriving in Castel Gandolfo. And like I explained in the article, this Pope has relaunched the tradition of the Pope to spend the summer in Castel Gandolfo, which is outside Rome. No? And I explained how the Satanists have always loved this, because Castel Gandolfo is the location where the Pope has also these wonderful gardens, is the place where, aside from everything else, like I explained in volume 12, there is the astronomical observatory that receives also all the transmissions from Mount Graham, from the Lucifer telescope, now known as Lucy. And we have there the Jesuits stationed all the time with their binocular and their look into space. And that is also a place where allegedly there was even an encounter with a UFO from a pope. So, and this happened in the early, I think it was basically in the early 50s. So we have a tradition there also, though, of Satanists who, in the period when the Pope resides there, celebrate masses all over the place, because that area is a very strong energetic area, which the Romans knew very much about, with a very old tradition of pagan cults that were pretty dark. And with the arrival of Christianity, they simply merged in what we commonly refer to as Satanism. So when the Pope goes and celebrates in these gardens, which have nothing Christian at all and no Christian symbolism at all, this green mass, which, like I said, is based on the lies of climate change, but is also based on the encyclica that the Pope Francis had built and constructed for his arrival. If you remember, in 2015, the Pope came to the United States of America, Pope Francis, and he then stood in front of the United Nations, and that was the moment in which they promoted the Agenda 2030. So the Pope is sticking to the secret Vatican-China deal orchestrated by the Jesuits, is doing everything that is wrong. Of course, we have also here in the United States Jesuits who fully support the illegal immigrants, who even participated to the protest against ICE. And at the same time, my latest article that you also pointed out in the title of this video is regarding one of the biggest scandals of our times. John Paul II, who is now Saint John Paul II, receiving in 2003 Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell arriving with the Lolita Express. I mean, it's like they really did something that people don't really understand. They don't really understand because they don't have the knowledge to understand it. In fact, Michael, I mean, you have seen how much we have the political pundits 24/7 discussing the subject of Jeffrey Epstein. Of course, it's a hot subject at the moment. And I think also it's a scandal that the White House can't just, brush off and calling people stupid or troublemakers. This was something that deeply offended the researchers and people who have dedicated their life to fight pedophilia, to fight all this evil in the world. And that's why I wanted to give a different take. And I didn't see anybody really discussing the contents of the little black book of Jeffrey Epstein, at least the unredacted version that briefly appeared after his death, and or actually before, but it was circulated online. Now it's only available in a redacted form. And then there was another black book or agenda, however you want to call it, a list of contacts that was found also by chance by somebody in New York, and then it was sold online on eBay. Now, in these contacts, we really find the key to the understanding of who Jeffrey Epstein really is. And we also find the key to the understanding of his contacts with the Vatican, which are not just contacts, secondary contacts. I mean, they demonstrate fully that Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein were welcomed by John Paul II because, A, there is a long tradition that puts together this Sabbatean Frankists, because Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein were originally, their families, from Poland and Ukraine. Those areas have always kind of been a little bit fluctuate. How you say? It's like, let's say that what was Polish then became Ukrainian, then became, Russian. I mean, it's an area where Podolia, for example, or where some of these Ashkenazi families, like the ones of both Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. Mm-hmm. I mean, and so we know that that is the place where Jacob Franco was born. Jacob Franco claimed to be the reincarnation of Shabbatai Zevi. We know that at the moment, if we stick to to the narrative that is being discussed 24/7 by everybody online, Jeffrey Epstein raised from obscurity in the middle of the 70s out of nowhere, and without even having finished the university, he ended up teaching at Dalton School, thanks to the father of Bill Barr, partly, who himself was also a very particular character, and Bill Barr himself was in charge at the time of his death, which is shrouded in mystery, and we need to know really what has happened there. But the problem is that I don't think we will ever have the whole truth, and so we will have to demand that truth, and at the same time we will have to continue advocating for clarity in respect to the victims, but also understanding that, of course, Jeffrey Epstein might be somebody who already now has somebody else following in his footsteps.
Oh,
that is, already doing the same thing. I mean, it's a little bit talking about the Jewish tradition, a golem that is created and another one that is recreated once that one has finished his existence. Now, people don't really understand.
Talk about the Sabbatean Frankist heresy. and how that was condemned by the regular Jewish community. I remember our last conversation, I said, well, the Khazarian mafia controls the world. And you're like, oh, Michael, no, the Jesuits control the world. And you talk about how this Sabbatean Frankist group basically allied with the Jesuits. So that's like a super bad group now. It's like, wow. So the Sabbatean Frankists are the ones that are, like you mentioned in your article, they're the ones that are in the banking and commercial part banking and medical classes, all kinds of crazy stuff. Hollywood, I'm sure. So it's wow, they've infiltrated deeply, but it's still the roots are with the Jesuits. Is that right?
The Jesuits were particularly relevant in those areas that are now Polonia and Ukraine, because at one time when they got kicked out of the Vatican, like I explained in volume 12, they actually managed to survive also thanks to the protection of the Empress of Russia, and it was in those areas which they survived and strived for longer. And so those areas had already a very strong Jesuit presence. And then we have, of course, Podolia, the place where it's in Ukraine, but part of Podolia is also in Poland, where Jacob Frank was born. And Jacob Frank was simply a Jewish heretic, somebody whose father was a merchant. He went to Turkey, to what is today Turkey, in particular Thessaloniki. I explain it in the article. It was one of the major cities, probably the most, the bigger city, the city with more Jews at the time in the world. Thessaloniki is a place of great importance. It can be called Thessaloniki, it can be called Salonika. There's various ways of pronouncing it. It is in today's, of course, Greece. But at the time, for several hundred years, became this central city for the development of the Jewish community. And because at one point, Shabbatai Zevi, who was a Jew who lived in Smyrna and proclaimed himself Smyrna is in Turkey, proclaimed himself Messiah of the Jews. At the time, actually, over 1 million people, and that is probably more than half of the Jewish population at the time residing in Europe, followed this messianic declaration and accepted it. It was only in 1666 when the Ottoman Sultan forced Shabbatai Zevi to convert to Islam, that he lost most of his followers, but he didn't lose them all. And his whole thing was then followed up by a group that became increasingly influential, especially in Thessaloniki, especially between the founders of the future, the merchant banks, the connections with London. We are talking about the established business relationships that were very important, especially in London and also in the Warsaw grain exchange. This is very important to explain that both Gill and Maxwell and Epstein actually come from the same area, and the mother of Epstein in particular came from that area, and the father apparently was also Russian and apparently also a Sabbatean, because the Sabbateans, and that's where we go into the influential Jewish sect that you put in the title. The Sabbateans only married between themselves or between or with some aristocratic Catholic families later on. When Jacob Frank came into the equation, he was born in modern-day Ukraine, went down to Thessaloniki with his father at a very early age. I think he was 12 years old. he converted by seeing these people so engaged in this weird interpretation of religion. Because the thing is this, when Shabbatai Zevi in 1666, which is also a year which is of course connected to Satanism, to the beast that of the apocalypse that they were expecting, of course, the Christians. No? So in that year, when Shabbatai Zevi declared himself to be Muslim, of course, most of the Jewish world abandoned him, but the ones who stayed faithful to him continued in secret. And that mean they established a religion which was in a public way. For example, they converted to Islam, but then in private they will continue their depraved heretical interpretation of Judaism, which was redemption through sin, searching through the darkness and the darkest rituals, pedophilia, incest, orgy, the basic of everything that Aleister Crowley later on, a long time later, a couple of centuries later, brought forward. They were the ones who really launched this whole thing. And in fact, when people say, Crowley created sexual magic, no, that's not the case. Of course, there is traces of those practices since antiquity, but it was in particular with the arrival of Shabbatai Zevi and later Jacob Franco claimed to be his reincarnation, that these practices, of course, evolved even more in the Western world. Let's not forget that in the East we have Tantra, we have sexual magical practices that predate Christianity. However, going back to Jacob Frank, since an early age, he came to the realization that he was the reincarnation of Shabbatai Zevi. Already at 12 years old, he had this idea. If we study both Shabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank with the modern psychological perspectives, we will probably find both of them lunatics or crazy, to say the least. In their,
you wrote a paragraph where Jacob Frank preached purification through transgression, and that's where all of the dark stuff comes in. Tell us a little bit about that. That is really, I was like, wow. You're constantly, I mean, your books are like incredible and your articles are unbelievable. So it's like you just keep revealing and revealing. It's just like there's no end to the depth of stuff that you cover. So that basically gives us an idea of why they do the pedophilia, the adrenochrome, and because they want to go to the depths of evil and then redeem themselves from that. Is that correct?
Yes, it's like they thought that the sparkles of this messianic legacy will somehow develop from practicing the worst kind of depraved things. I mean, they went even against the precept of their own religion. Like, for example, eating pork. That is something we know Jews don't do, and Judaism doesn't permit. But they will do that, and they will actually do it on the holidays of the Jewish faith to be even more transgressive. They will do, and by the way, like Rabbi Marvin Alterman once said, Henry Kissinger was a typical Sabbatian Frankist. In fact, the first time when he went on an official visit in Israel, he asked for a sandwich with pork in it. I mean, and I saw with my own eyes a known Sabbatian Frankist Kabbalist is no longer with us. He was called Ari Ben-Nun, who apparently was very much fond of prosciutto, which is an Italian pork, very good, sliced, seasoned. And I remember there was these guys I used to know from the P2 Lodge who said, we saw Ari Ben-Nun. Yeah, during the night he went into the fridge and he had some pork. I was like, the thing is, they did that regularly. So that is what characterized the Sabbatean Frankists. On top of that, the fact that they liked adultery, they liked to practice orgies. In fact, Sabbatai Zevi went and searched for his wife all the way in Italy, in Livorno, where there was this, there is still today one of the most important Jewish Masonic communities. And it was there that he actually found as his wife somebody who was a prostitute, a little bit of a Mary Magdalene figure of sorts. He wanted, and this might be the only positive note, to open up the idea of accepting Jesus as a prophet. I mean, I don't know if that is something that though the Christians will find good in any way. Now, Jacob Frank, like I said, initially found this calling about feeling that he was the reincarnation of Shabbatai Zevi. So he got more and more immersed in in the Sabbatean faith. And at one point in Thessaloniki, he simply declared himself to be the reincarnation, going back then to where he lived, which is modern-day Ukraine, and at that, in Podolia, and he started spreading this new form of Sabbatean faith. And when he didn't only shaped, he actually had a few thousand followers, and he convinced a few thousand of them to infiltrate the Catholic Church by converting to the Catholic faith. And that was really what puts together Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and John Paul II. John Paul II was Pope Wojtyla, was a Polish pope, and was particularly dedicated to the Holy Mary, the Black Mary of Czestochowa. Now, I have discussed, as you know, in volume 12, the importance of the Black Marys in particular in relation to the ancient forms of paganism like Isis and other forms of the Mother Goddess. This is very important because the Holy Mary of Czestochowa was particularly dear to Jacob Frank, and so it became even more important than for John Paul II, who had a very close link with the Sabbatean Frankist community. So there was, of course, that link, which is very important.
So
then another link.
Who created the Luciferians first? Was the Sabbateans that influenced the Illuminati, that influenced?
Okay, the Illuminati. Okay,
it's complicated.
Okay, no, let's go into that question because it's very interesting. Now, at the end of the 18th century, there was a lot of, coming together of various Masonic rites and things, and the Illuminati in 1776 were built by Adam Weishaupt, who was, of course, very much inspired by the Jesuits. But, the Jesuits had been kicked out of the Vatican, so they kind of recycled themselves within Freemasonry, within the Illuminati, and so on. And then at one point, the cousin of Jacob Frank became the founder of a very influential group of Freemasons known as the Asiatic Brethren, because there was a prohibition for Jews to join the traditional Prussian lodges or the traditional Christian, lodges, which is the strict observance. I mean, the ones that were very much connected to the Templar, especially in particular what became the Swedish Rite, and also in France, the Chevalier Bénéficent de la Città Sainte, known as CBCS, Rectified Scottish Rite now, which is the main rite practice in today's Switzerland. They didn't really want to accept Jews within their lodges. There was a prohibition even within the Illuminati to not accept the Jewish within their lodges. Let's not forget that. So what happens here? It happens that they needed to have their own form of Freemasonry or a way to interact. So with the Jesuits, the cousin of Jacob Frank created a form of Freemasonry. And at the same time, another important figure within the initiatic world of the time, which is very influential, a French mystic called Martinez Pasquali, who founded the Order de Chevalier the Louis de Cohen, or Order of the Night Masons, became the elite of Freemasonry. This guy, Martin de Pasquale, was himself actually allegedly a Sabbatian.
Mm-hmm.
And he was actually embracing Frankism. So the key figures within what will later become the high degrees of Freemasonry were actually Sabbatian Frankists. And at one point, all these forms of Freemasonry came together for what was known as the convent of Wilhelmsbad. In this place, in this convent of Wilhelmsbad, they came together, and that's when the Sabbatian Frankists extended further their influence within Freemasonry. Now, Frank taught a doctrine of holiness of sin, claiming that with the arrival of the Messiah, everything was permitted. So it was more than the arrival of the Messiah. It seems like the arrival of Ozzy Osbourne meets Aleister Crowley on a good day in hell. but in any case, because there's a lot of people today that talk still, we saw, of course, maximum respect for an artist like Ozzy Osbourne. But let's not forget, he was the guy who sang Mr. Crowley, and he was also the guy who allegedly went also to the Bohemian Club, Bohemian Grove, with all the rich and powerful, and people like, of course, Bush, who seem to have loved, and especially Barbara Bush, apparently loved very much Ozzy Osbourne. I mean, that's pretty scary, because they even say that Barbara Bush was the legitimate or the daughter of Aleister Crowley. We don't know, but there is some evidence that points in that direction. Now, going back to this, you see, we have discussed, if you remember, in volume 9, the fact that the Gnostics are the ones who really were the Illuminati of the origins. When Christianity came around, the Gnostics infiltrated, in a way, used Christianity to develop further their heresies. And that's where we found also some sexual magic present, even if not at the levels of later on. But volume 9 is where we actually, I also describe how the Illuminati, how Freemasons really were very fond of Gnosticism. Now, Jacob Frank taught a doctrine that, in a way, the radical Frankists, as Gershom Scholem. Now, Gershom Scholem, for those who don't know it, was one of the main historians, experts recognized worldwide still to this day on Sabbatai Zevi and the Sabbatians. And that he said that they developed what is known as a veritable mythology of nihilism, in which the new messianic dispensation entailed a complete reversal of values, symbolized by change of the 36 prohibition of the Torah into positive commands. So everything that up until the day before was maybe prohibited and was permitted. Like the ancient Gnostics, they indulge in this orgiastic, sexually promiscuous, and even incestuous rites. And that is really why, when we see a guy like Jeffrey Epstein is a creation of this, is a creation, but when I explained, as you know, in volume 7, it's very important, this book. But in this book, I said one thing which stands to this day. I said, if there is one way and one thing that might compromise Donald J. Trump, is Jeffrey Epstein and the Sabbatian Frankists. So this is not something that I just came up with yesterday or the day before or whenever I published this article that you are showing. I discussed it already a long time ago, and I stand by what I wrote. There is a possibility that Trump gets compromised, and it gets compromised, and as you see here, page 34, for those who have this book, 33 and 34, entitled The Sabbatian Frankist Involvement and the QAnon PSYOP. And in this page here, I say, President Trump, who flew on Jeffrey Epstein's private Florida Express jet more times than was previously known. And I said, I basically explained, I said, and might have compromised Trump. Now, this is
all the way back then.
Huh?
I said, "Wow!" All the way back then, you were bringing this up.
Yes, I brought that back then this up, and I stand always by what I write because
that was that publication date was February 7th, 2022.
Yeah, and I already talked also about the Ukrainian conflict. I wasn't even yet fully developed, but I announced it and I explained it. And I explained also the links later on in volume 9 of the Ukraine, the Theosophical Society, the Sabbatians. I mean, Volodymyr Zelensky is a typical Sabbatian Frankist. I mean, you have to understand here, we are not discussing theory or accusations that are built out of thin air. We are talking about history here. When, for example, we discuss Ghislaine Maxwell comes from the Hawk family. Her real name is not Maxwell. It was actually Robert Maxwell, who we know was a secret agent, a man that became a millionaire, but and was. The incredible thing about Robert Maxwell was that he was working for several different intelligence agencies during his career, but that cost him his life because of the work he did for the KGB. Ultimately, the Mossad decided to kill him, but then homage him with a state funeral. This is like, and people are like a bit confused, say, "Oh, he was a Mossad agent." Yeah, well, he was not only that; he was a triple agent. You know,
that makes sense.
You know, in the world of intelligence, it's like double, triple, quadruple, and loyalty is very, let's say, very fluid at some point. Yeah. Now, the thing is that today people point out on the more materialistic elements of Jeffrey Epstein. The rapid rise to power thanks to this, from being allegedly a mathematical wizard into becoming some expert in the stock market and then later on rising in a sorts of hedge fund. In reality, he was also a weapon dealer. He was a guy who understood that if you are present in a room with other people and you socialize with these people, then maybe you can use your connections to build your own wealth. This I tell you from a personal experience, because when I was in the Monte Carlo Lodge, which was a very influential lodge of the P2, where people like Henry Kissinger also and other people used to be present, it was, I mean, it happened. I viewed it more than once. The people, okay, I present you this guy to this other guy, and you can sell, I don't know, 1,000,000 mines, 1,000,000 machine guns, and you give me 5%, 2%, 1%. That is what makes you wealthy very fast. Or like, for example, oh yes, they need a factory to make the tomatoes in Senegal. Let me see if I have a brother in a lodge that has this. You understand? So it's very fast, but that builds and generates revenue very fast. Now, he was definitely an excellent public relation. We know that. Yeah. We know that, but we also, people still to this day don't have access to the origins of Jeffrey Epstein, because yes, we know that, like I said, I put together 1 and 1 is 2, no? So if you put together two people who have a similar background, Ghislaine Maxwell arrives in New York in the early 90s after the father was killed, but there was never definitive confirmation. She herself said he was killed, but there was no, others say it was suicide. But in any case, she was very popular in England because the father was owning the tabloids. which is the ultimate form of propaganda. So she wanted to live a different kind of life, away from the scrutiny. Back then it was possible. We didn't have the World Wide Web, we didn't have the social networks and so on. So she moved to New York. Then she was aided and by the connection she had, and the major connection she had was with Jeffrey Epstein, who himself was already a family friend, because he came into contact with this Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell's real name is Jan Ludwig Eman Benjamin Ock. And it's nothing, Maxwell is a construct. In 1946, he became British, and he decided that he would call himself Maxwell. It's great. Sounds very very secret agent, Maxwell. Yeah. Sounds, of course,
like the current, king, queen of England. They took the Windsor name. They weren't Windsor. They were a German name. And because of World War I, they changed it. They just stole the Windsor name.
Sure, because of course, their Hanoverian German origins were not favorable for the public.
You taught me that.
In any case, Robert Maxwell he comes from a town called Slatiski Doli. Now, where is this place? This place is in today's, historically is part of Rutenia, is now part of Ukraine. Both Rutenia and Podolia, who are approximately, now let me tell you a little bit, Rutenia is more north, Podolia is more south. It will include parts of, I guess, Ukraine, a little bit of Moldova. These regions that they were fueled by people that had, been in their eyes blessed with the revelation of Jacob Frank, because Jacob Frank had pushed his revelation of being the Messiah in those areas, and he was accepted. And even when he himself started to have problems, both with the Jewish authorities and even the Catholic authorities, because at one point the Catholic authorities had problems with the Jesuits and with Jacob Frank also. So Jacob Frank found himself a little bit in a problematic position. Jacob Frank was a guy who saw his daughter, Eve Frank, as the incarnation of the Holy Mary. I mean, we are at levels of insanity which is just like out of reach for normal people these days. It's cultish stuff, how you want to call it. Eve Frank became this mystic leader, and she basically declared herself, after the father, the only woman Messiah. So imagine this Sabbatean Frankist, how, they were really convinced about it all. That is Jacob Frank. But then you should go into Eve Frank's page, because you will find out that she was very big in the Ottoman Empire, and she was actually seeing herself to be the incarnation of the Shekinah. Going to finding the daughter, Eve Frank, because I want to show you something with Eve Frank, the connection that brings us directly to Pope John Paul II and the connection with Jeffrey Epstein. Eve Frank. Did you find it?
Yeah, I got it right here.
Okay, perfect. Now, second paragraph, it says, received the name in 1760 upon the conversion of her family to Catholicism. Now, like I explained, they didn't have a problem in converting to other faiths. So like Shabbatai Zevi let his followers convert to Islam, Jacob Frank let his followers convert to Catholicism. It says here, if you see in the early life, that when she was 16, she declared to be the incarnation of the Shekinah, the female aspect of God, as well as the incarnation of the Virgin Mary, and thus became the object of a devotional subcult herself near the Catholic Marian shrine of Czestochowa. Now, if you go on Czestochowa, you can click on Czestochowa, and the only woman to declare, you will see that Czestochowa is the home of the Black Madonna of Czestochowa, and Czestochowa was also home to Frankism in the late 18th and 19th century, and also, of course, Czestochowa was a holy place since the 1930s for John Paul II. So you see, it's all connected. So the Holy Mary of Czestochowa is the connection between the Sabbatean Frankists and the Catholic Church and John Paul II, who was a Polish Pope. Both Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein came from the same area. So they were basically coming from both Rutelia and Podolia, because the area where Maxwell's family came, I think it was Rutelia, and then but also Podolia. These two areas, Podolia and Rutelia, these areas are interchangeable because the families, the Jewish families that were involved in these areas were somehow united, very united. It is a very much a unification. You see, the Jewish communities, which were part of Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, and Poland, are the communities in which the Sabbatean legacy somehow spread. And so, Jeffrey Epstein, who himself saw himself as a modern Sabbatean from the very early days of his life, was very much favorable to engage with somebody else who had the same similar family background and had also very important pedigree like Ghislaine Maxwell. And so they became really very united from the beginning, but also idealistically, because they knew that Sabbatean Frankism is a way that is not understood by the majority of people. The majority of people doesn't understand that you commit an act of incest or an orgy and you are yourself saying to be in line with God. I mean, majority of people would say you are insane.
Yeah, and you know, his daughter, like you said, she's like Shekinah and the Virgin Mary. Like, wow.
Yeah, but I will not. I will not put past that even Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell at one point saw themselves as some holy beings. I mean,
Sure.
we are seeing in the history of Jeffrey Epstein the typical Prometheus rising that at one point though falls. And so whoever crossed them during that period, of course, was very much impressed with them, including Donald J. Trump. So that is the problem here. The problem is also, like I explained in the article, and we are, I mean, everything which I'm saying is still scratching the surface because we will need probably hours and hours and hours to go through everything. But
Yeah.
I want to make it clear for the common folk who is watching us, otherwise it will become a million names and confusing.
Sure.
Now, in regards to Trump, who is he protecting? He's protecting, of course, connections that are very influential. So we have, like I said, the only, the thing about the Sabbatean Frankists, because of their krypton, because of their hidden nature, because they were not open, they didn't have temples. If they had temples, the Jewish community will condemn them because they were heretics. The Catholic community, of course, didn't want Catholics who were in secret Jews preaching some kind of heresy, and the same for the Muslims. But still, if we go and see in the history of the Dommeh, this book that, of course, you have read, very important, volume 10. As you know, in this book,
That's a great book. That was very revealing.
yes,
So many things. Wow.
many
I've been many years, 20 I think years in the Middle East, and that just cleared so many things for me.
And if you remember, in this book, I explained that in Thessaloniki, because of the Dommeh, we saw the birth of modern Turkey, but also we saw the birth of Nazism through the founder of the Thule Gesellschaft Lodge that initiated Adolf Hitler, the rituals of the Thule Society. Rudolf von Sembotendorf was also a Turkish citizen, but he was also a German guy who helped at the very financing of the first publication of what became the Nazi Party. Adolf Hitler, as I explained in this book, as you know, practiced the secret rituals of these Dommeh who had, because the Dommeh were are very syncretic in their way, meaning they pick up from all the esoteric traditions, regardless of their faith. It can be Islam, it can be Catholicism, it can be whatever, as long as they can fit it in their own scheme of things. So the understanding is also that the Dommeh, and so what became the Dommeh, very influential, because they even go as far as influencing the very birth of Nazism. So I mean, this is rather incredible if you think about it, because then, if we stand by some of the things that also Rabbi Antelman wrote and other Jewish researchers, there was definitely a connection between Adolf Hitler and the Sabbatean Frankists, even in his own birth and conception. So the banking system, who is the bankers? Who are the bankers? Where is this? The bankers are the ones who, of course, the banking system is where the Sabbatean Frankist sect has found their call. A little bit like we said, the Jesuits found their call in education, and they went on to take over education. The Sabbatean Frankists found their call in banking. But then also, like I said, there is this connection with the black aristocracy, the black nobility. And that's also what we find in the Little Black Book of Jeffrey Epstein. We find the connections that bring us directly to the Pope. The connections, because when we say black nobility, you know, black nobility can be interpreted also in an erroneous way. There is also black aristocrat in the sense of black color. I'm talking about papal nobility. Nobility of the Catholic Court, particularly close to the Pope, can be found only in Rome and also in Venice. And in fact, when we go inside Jeffrey Epstein, and in my article on ZAGAMI.com, I picked up a page 12 of his Little Black Book, we find different names from this very incredible world that Jeffrey Epstein was connected with, because the connection of the black aristocracy, black nobility, and the Sabbatean Frankists and the Jesuits is all one big happy family, if we want to call it in that way, no? And in fact, there is a specific connection that, in particular, you can find at page 12 of that Little Black Book, which is Brandolini Dada. And that is the Brandolini Dada brings us directly into the heart of the Exor holding. And people say, but what is the Exor holding? Well, let me refresh your mind. The owner of Chrysler, Dodge, Ferrari, Fiat, and the list goes on. And John Elkann, who is the modern heir to the whole thing, and his cousin, of course, Brandolini Dad, Tiberto Brandolini Dad, married with a princess of the black nobility. And the family Elkann is a family from the Sabbatean Frankists, is a Jewish Sabbatean Frankist family. I mean, they're all following the same.
Wow.
See? So
staggering.
There is no way that Trump can do anything against these people. Trump has brought to the White House John Elkann in June. He was with him in Riyadh, in Qatar in May. How can you go against this system? Michael, my question to you is, how can we fight a system which is built on this?
We can't. We have to collapse that system and create another one, I guess.
Yeah.
Staggering.
I guess that you said the right thing. You have to collapse the system.
Yes. Yep.
And at that point, create another one. But I mean, that means a complete collapse of our civilization.
Yeah.
So, you see, in the last chapter of volume 10, I explained also how the Sabbatean Frankists have created the anti-Semitism by fomenting the creation of the protocols of the sages of Zion, which became then important an inspiration for all the modern anti-Semites. So the thing is, people ask me, but why the Sabbatean Frankists, who are Jews, hate the Jews? Because they are the elite. They don't care about the millions of people who ended up in the concentration camps. They didn't care about those people. They were hanging out with the elite. They didn't care. Do you think a Rothschild family cared about the people who ended up in the concentration camps? So it's
no, I mean, it's staggering because, I know from studying, you probably are the same. We know that 2,000 sailors were sacrificed at Pearl Harbor by our president so that he could get us into a war. And I know that. Many other people know that. But is that common knowledge? No. But here you're basically giving us the real history and how many people.
And there was the involvement of the Jesuits in Japan in all that.
Wow.
So, because there was a key figure in the Japanese military who was a Catholic who moved for the attack. So, I mean, if we go deep into the research, it gets even, the rabbit hole is always deeper and deeper. Now, for example, another name that you can see in that page 12 is Ugo Brachetti Peretti. Is another guy who helped Jeffrey Epstein arrive into John Paul II. Who is the brother-in-law of Ugo Brachetti Peretti? Is the billionaire spy Nicole Junkerman, aka the Bond girl, who was the only guest that was allowed to fly on the Lolita Express without being monitored. Some say she was even the last female person to see Jeffrey Epstein in prison while he was there before allegedly taking his life. So Ugo Brachetti Peretti, brother-in-law, is dead. But I mean, we could go on. And like I said, we will need an entire book to go along and explain everything. So for the moment, like I said, we can scratch the surface. But this is enough to understand that we have expected a lot, maybe too much, from Donald J. Trump. I have been always a great supporter for the last 10 years since he came down those stairs.
Yeah.
But I now realize that once you are in power, unfortunately, this system inevitably holds you by the balls in one way or another. And this is sad. I mean, it is sad because, of course, you know, when you see the level of corruption, I mean, Jeffrey Epstein was hanging out with Fidel Castro, who is another Jesuit agent, as you know. I talked about him also in Volume 12. When people arrived, you know, in the apartment in New York of Jeffrey Epstein, broke in, the FBI arrived, you know, they filmed. There is some filming of it. You know, you can see his photo with the Pope, with Ghislaine, and you have photo with Fidel Castro. Here you are basically, Fidel Castro is Jesuitism, is the Jesuit elite. The brother of Fidel Castro was the one who said to Pope Francis before, I think it was a few days before going to the United Nations, 2015, on his way or on the way back, now I don't remember, I think on his way, he said, I wanted to actually, and he was already in charge of Cuba at that time, now he's no longer, but he picked up from his brother, now, and his brother was sick, and he said, I wanted to be a real Jesuit. But you can still be a fifth-class Jesuit, as I explained in Volume 12 of my Confessions. And a fifth-class Jesuit is simply a Jesuit like Nancy Pelosi, a Jesuit like many others who stand in the corridors of power. And of course, now we see all these MSNBC, CNN, and whatever, all excited. Ooh, finally they have some. I mean, it's paradoxical that these people who never wanted to, yes, Raul Castro, somebody said Raul Castro, yes. It's paradoxical if you think about it, Michael, that if I brought you in a time machine back, you know, like I brought somebody from 6 years to now and show them that nowadays MSNBC is talking almost all the time about Jeffrey Epstein, or even Don Lemon, former CNN, has specials on Jeffrey Epstein and if Jeffrey Epstein was killed or not. I mean, you will think you are living in a Twilight Zone because 6 years ago it was me, it was Alex Jones, it was other people talking, and the left was like, this is nonsense, nothing to see here. The reason is very simple, because now they are willing to throw under the bus Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, and they don't care. So then, regardless of the Russian hoax, which, I mean, Trump needs to come out and be perfectly honest and clear. He can't insinuate things. Yesterday, by basically saying, oh, Epstein stole Virginia Giuffre, because that's what came out of his statement, he triggered an interview with the family, which I completely understand, outraged, passing out, stealing, like these women were property. Now, this is really what we need to understand. If the level of ethics and morals on both sides is not present any longer, we are only a minute away from a revolution, because people at one point, when they understand that both the left and the right and everybody's in bed with this, you know, with these compromises, then the next step is just to hang them. And that is what happened in the French Revolution, or it happened in the other revolutions that we saw in the course of history, but then with the results of that, of course, are unpredictable in the end. Because remember one thing, that yes, the architects of the revolution might be there, you know, carefully orchestrating the plot to put this and that in power, but in the end, it never goes the way they are predicted. So I think that at the moment, people need to understand that they can't be brought for a ride every week for a psychological operation. You know that I published my book, volume 11, about mind control and psychological operations, and it's the past, present, and future, starting from Sun Tzu all the way to MK Ultra. But if every week we are brought for a ride and with no real results and only a lot of promises, that is something that in the end makes the majority of the citizens not caring anymore about the realm of politics, disinterested. That is the problem. They lose affection for politics. Politics, in a way, in the last 10 years, thanks to Donald Trump, has regained popularity. Because if you think about it, in the era that we saw neocons passing, the testimony to Democrats between Bushes and the Clinton, nothing changed and everything was the same old rubbish. And everything was controlled by the propaganda of the usual people on TV like CNN and so on. And now Trump has been maybe talking a lot, at times even too much. And at this point, is Trump maintaining his promises? Because what Joe Rogan said about drawing a line in the sand in regards to Epstein, I actually agree with him. Now, a lot of people will say, Rogan was not ever a real MAGA, this, that, he was a Democrat before, and blah, blah, blah. No. In regards to making the Epstein case clear, there were some promises. Kash Patel, Dan Bongino can't go in front of the cameras and reverse what they said until the day before for months on end on their podcast and other interviews.
Yep.
It's just like, at that point, it's just like, okay, we are mind control. Where are we going to go next? So what kind of BS are they going to push to us tomorrow? But who is going to believe in this anymore? So it is very much with great disappointment. And of course, I still think that Trump needs to have better advisors, because with the current advisors, he's not doing the right choices. Words need to be very measured. We're talking about Virginia Giuffre, who ended up her life this year. Now, what happened in the last month of Virginia Giuffre's life, it's really, we witnessed it together. No, you saw at one point she said she was invested by a bus. Then she said I have only a few days left. Then after, and then suicidal. No, this it's not something that we can accept as researchers. We can't be simply accused of being fixated because, we are fixated. No, it's not a question of fixated here. How can Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell arrive on the Lolita Express to meet with the future saint of the Catholic Church? It's not possible. And what is your feeling about all this, Michael?
Which in particular, like Trump, or
in particular to the whole Jeffrey Epstein debacle in regards to the presidency?
I think he might still be alive.
No, apart from the possibility that he might still be alive, which is of course a possibility, and we can discuss.
But I look at all the things that are going on that you've talked about, and I look at the Pope and Zelensky. Zelensky's like, killing, the Russian Orthodox,
Sure.
Yeah, he's killing them. And so the Pope goes, stop that. That's not right. Is that lip service? Probably, now that we understand from your conversation here. Is Trump, doing lip service too? That yes, we're going to arrest all these people. Yeah, so Jeffrey Epstein involvement. Yeah, it's so that black book, like you talked about, it's got all these names. If you start to disclose, so he wants to throw Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama in jail. Maybe the Sabbateans, they're like, we'll give it.
The thing about also this whole discussion of Obama in jail, waste of time and energy. Guys, the Supreme Court has given the possibility for Trump to not go in jail. The same stands for Obama, the same stands for any other presidential president that we had, presidential figure, president. Okay, so already Trump himself said, oh, well, it's going to be the collaborators that pay because Obama has the immunity. Of course he has the immunity because you had the immunity. It was recognized to you. It will be recognized to him. And it will always be recognized to a president. Otherwise, this republic will not stand. That's how it works. So eluding, you know, I was on a show with a guy called Nino Rodriguez, who is a notorious boxer, podcaster guy, former boxer. No? I don't know if you heard of him. Very nice guy. And already a month ago, or no, a couple of months, he asked me this question, what do you think Obama is going to be arrested? I said, forget about it. It's a waste of your time. It's deflection. It's just pushing pushing your thought, wasting your energies, your time. It's never going to happen because at that point, we will have a civil war. So people need to realize this. They have to be, okay, we can be called conspiracy theories or truth seekers, but we have to understand that we can't waste the energy of people. Energy these days is a very, very important, it's a very precious thing if you think about it. We don't have much energy because our energy is constantly wasted by bombardment from social networks to news sites to this and that, and it's like we need to save our energy, cherish our energy, spend it for things that are realistic. So if you tell me, okay, tomorrow morning we're going to do a civil war, that is a different thing. That tomorrow morning we're going to arrest Barack Obama. I believe more if you tell me that tomorrow morning we start a civil war than if you tell me that we're going to arrest Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton. It's never going to happen. Hillary is a wife of Bill Clinton. Of course, these people should be arrested. Of course, they're criminals. Yeah. I've been talking about it for ages. And people are smart out there. And so when, for example, my colleague Alex Jones, we're going to be now, Obama's going to go in jail. Guys, can we focus on the fact that the MIT has just published a research, and this research confirms that your brain is going to be shrinking because of the AI. And already our kids in the universities have their brain starting to shrink. Now, soon we're going to be in idiocracy because brain starts shrinking naturally from when you have a certain age. But if your brain starts shrinking at 20, at 60, we will have idiots that... So, people need to understand, we have the threat of AI, cyber Satan around the corner, the takeover of everything. And in 10 years from now, the whole political scene is going to be changed by AI. The whole scene of civil servants is going to be changed forever by AI. So this is really what is happening here. It's like a deflection from the real problems. And the real problems is that soon we're going to, we are losing our mind. More and more, we have more and more examples of people losing their mind on a daily basis. Do you know that the research has confirmed recently that a quarter, I repeat, a quarter of the American population has mental diseases? Do you know that?
It wouldn't surprise me.
No, it's not a surprise. It's a confirmation from the Johns Hopkins University. A quarter. So, that's a big problem. We have people who simply lose it between 20 and 30 years of age. We have cases of bipolarism, schizophrenia. And after the pandemic, we have seen a variety of mental illnesses on a scale unprecedented. And these are the real problems. These are more real than Jeffrey Epstein. These are more real than
agree.
Obama.
I agree. Yeah. And it's not being addressed. It's being hidden still. Yeah.
It's being hidden. And at the same time, it's being hidden. Why? Because of the big pharma making the money, like I said, from the 1950s onwards, pushing pharmaceutics, medicines that we don't need, solutions that are artificial, that instead ruin our health. So this cult, the Sabbatean Frankists, has managed to transform our society in what it is now. They were the ones, if you think about it, and I wrote volume 8 of my Confessions based on the involvement of the Sabbatean Frankists in the entertainment world, in Hollywood in particular, but in all the entertainment world. From the music business to the cinema business, everything has crafted generations and generations of people. And where are we now? This is the thing. So, I mean, you simply put on Netflix or put on another streaming service and you see where they're going. And where they're going is not really a happy place. Most of the movies that they present this summer are horror movies that are just bad cinema on an epic scale, but also they are horror. So, they are about terrorizing people. So the Jesuits and the Sabbatean Frankists have functioned in this way. The Jesuits have pushed, of course, the education, the narrative, their own interpretation of history. On the other side, the Sabbatean Frankists have helped the banking system, the entertainment world with the production. Let's go and see who are the producers. Because
Sabbateans, yeah, absolutely. It's the same thing.
No,
they're everywhere.
There is this surname, Epstein. And who is Epstein? Who is Brian Epstein? Do you know who is Brian Epstein? Now, I want to tell you who is Brian Epstein, because this will make it very clear for everybody once and for all. He played a crucial role in the Beatles' rise to fame as their manager.
Wow.
He discovered them in 1961 at the Cavern Club in Liverpool. He recognized their potential, and he was often called the fifth Beatle. Epstein. It sounds, it's not bad, But this, just to give you an example. But nowadays, there is the talk of pardoning P. Diddy or pardoning Ghislaine Maxwell. If Trump does either one or the other thing, he unfortunately will lose any form of moral superiority. Here we have, and then I see you are on the topic. You are already on the topic.
Yep, Lithuanian Jewish. Yep, wow.
Lithuanian Jewish. So we are back in the same area.
Back in the same, yep. Sabbatean.
Yeah. Sabbatean, Frankist area.
See, we're all learning. So it's amazing.
So,
now we can do the research and put all these different actors and actresses together and how they have misled us for a long time.
Misled, but also shaped the Western world. Now, in a way, we can thank the Judeo-Christian civilization, including what the Sabbateans' influence is in all this, because they have, in a way, separated the church and state, so there wasn't too much of one in the other affairs, and in a way it worked out for a period of time. But nowadays, when we are guesting in the West more and more, giving them power people like the future mayor of New York, a Shia Muslim, and the Muslims are basically coming into the West, bringing their whole thing, you know, Sharia included.
Yeah, they're not assimilating. That's what made America great. Everybody came from all over the world, assimilated, and made America great. And they're not assimilating. And they're giving handouts. No one ever gave handouts to those people that came, you know, from Ellis Island. They came here to work their ass off and made America great. But here we have stealing, I see it, America, and through this this Muslim culture.
And then you have this mix, which as you know,
but it's still the same. It's still the Sabbathean.
Yeah, the Sabbathean. The mix of Islamic.
There's no difference. Freemasonry, everything. You talked about it.
Yes.
We did a long show on it. We went through chapter by chapter. I remember I was like, we have to go through chapter to chapter because I spent most of my life in the Middle East. This is amazing. So I mean, even you go to the point where, you know, they took, you know, Christian boys and turned them into janissaries to fight for the Muslims, and they had to be circumcised. So who gets circumcised? That's the Jews. So it's all interrelated, like you talk about. It's insane.
No, absolutely. And it's all connected. And of course, in regards to this new Pope, some people were saying this new Pope might maybe change also the Vatican-China deal. No, absolutely, it's continuing. Because in all this, let's not forget that the Sabbatean Frankists and the Jesuits have always had a lot of interest with China. Who opened China to the world? Michael, it was Henry Kissinger. So, I mean, I remember one day I was talking with a guy from a Turkish guy who has spent some time in China. His wife was Chinese. And he told me about the fact that the only ones dealing with drugs in China were the Mossad. So, just, you know, that is pretty incredible, no? And in this article that you are showing, I basically explain how this patriotic church that was established by the communists, which is in itself a diablerie that should never be recognized by anybody, is instead now fully recognized by the Catholic Church. And there is definitely a way now for the Catholic Church to remain present in China by shutting an eye on what they are really doing to Christians in China, or even to the underground Catholic Church that didn't accept these bishops nominated by the Chinese Communist Party, which is, like I said, a monstrosity. So this Pope has changed nothing. And then LifeSite News, which is a big site, I don't know, for people who are Catholic, who know about Catholicism and traditional Catholicism. In the last few years, LifeSite News has become a beacon of hope, or was a beacon of hope, because they were very critical, you know, on what the Catholic Church was doing towards becoming more and more progressive. Well, now suddenly they have changed, they have kicked out basically the co-founder. They have changed their editorial line. He was also, you know, removed as editor-in-chief, simply because nobody is allowed anymore to criticize Pope Leo. So Pope Leo might seem a smiley guy who, you know, is not so vocal like Pope Francis. Again, you know, the Jesuits are much more vocal and much more, you know, present in the political arena, because it was the first Jesuit Pope, and we saw him from the very beginning being very much present in the political game. He stands a little bit more reserved, but in reality is doing things that are even worse every day. in the reform of the church and everything else that goes with it. In line, of course, with this whole thing of forming a one world religion. And at the same time, the Sabbatean Frankists have infiltrated the Jewish faith for now 200 years. And here in America, you have a progressive Judaism that really is more present than traditional Judaism. So
it makes sense, because I always wondered, why don't, normal regular Jews push back on this Khazarian Sabbatean group, and like they're infiltrated. Wow.
No, absolutely. I mean, the progressive Jews, in fact, there is actually the late Rabbi Marvin Alterman, who spoke very much in his books about, I mean, Reform Judaism, call it liberal Judaism, is now the biggest Jewish movement. It picks up, of course, funding from the Rothschilds and other important families of the Sabbatean elite. It focuses on a interpretation of the of Judaism, which is very much progressive. It embraces the same woman leadership that Pope Leo, Pope Francis are embracing for the Catholic Church. The same thing is done in Judaism, but also LGBTQ inclusion. And of course, they are the ones pushing for a unification, interfaith dialogue, and for the one world religion. Ultimately, like somebody is saying here, do as thou wilt, do what thou wilt is what Crowley, his motto. But in reality, that is what Shabbatai Zevi and then Jacob Frank brought forward. So the Frankists, the Jewish rabbis who tried to fight this heresy, of course, they then became, let's say, they are the ones who gave birth to the Orthodox Judaism of today, because it was almost a reaction. You understand? It's like almost like you see something you don't like and you go all the other way. And Zionism, now people say to me always about, Zionism. I mean, the Zionist leading organizations like American Jewish Congress, the World Jewish Congress, the B'nai Brit, which is this form of Freemasonry, the Constitutional Grand Lodge of the Order of the Sons of the Covenant. All these groups are controlled by the Sabbatean Frankists. And they were established by Sabbatean Frankists. Wow. So you see, like Antelman pointed out in his to eliminate the opiate, but I mean, it is really also Gershom Scholem, which I mentioned earlier, this great historian, and later also Jacqueline Rose, they outlined this in The Question of Zion. Zionism derives from the Sabbateans. It was Shabbatai Zevi that called for the first time all the Jews to go back to Israel. So this is how things need to be understood. And the anti-Jewishness that we saw growing and growing, especially lately, but even from, even before, has always been fomented somehow by the Sabbatean Frankists, who have always rejected the Orthodox Jews for their adherence to the Bible and resented them for the persecution they had been made to endure. You see, the Frankists were persecuted, and the Sabbatean. So they themselves wanted revenge upon the fellow Jew who persecuted them. That's why the Frankists were united by let's say positive aspects. So the dislike of the Jews who forced them into conversion and thus cut them off from their dear ones, and the hatred and all that. I mean, in the end, the Sabbateans are the ones who actually invented Orthodox Judaism, if we really want to tell the things how it is. So I'm glad that today we were able to explain all this to your Shane Baum in Mexico, of course, but we have also Schlein in Italy, who is the head of the Democratic Party in Italy, who is also Sabbatean Frankist and has numerous passports. I mean, they're present very much. I mean, so these people are ruining, and what is happening now with Gaza? People need to understand. I explained this also in the man. Gaza was the holy city of the Sabbateans, because at one point Shabbatai Zevi, who wanted to be recognized as a Messiah, was kicked out from Jerusalem, from the Council of Rabbis there. And Nathan of Gaza, who was almost like the John the Baptist of Shabbatai Zevi, who was from Gaza, invited him in Gaza, and that's where they performed these orgiastic rituals and crazy stuff, cursing forever that place. And at the same time, what we're seeing today, of course, is monstrous and it's terrible, but it is simply in line with what, I mean, also this persecution, for example, by of the Christians, or not only the Muslims, and everything that goes with it is all part of
just recently a Israeli tank which shoots around, which is basically goes very straight and there's no it doesn't move around, doesn't drop or anything. They hit a Christian church. They hit the steeple on a Christian church, and it killed 3 Christians. So yeah, they're not for either side. They don't care. They want that land. They're going to kill to get it. Now I know that they did not kill the Iranian leader. They killed everybody else. They bombed to hell and killed everybody else, but they did not kill that Iranian leader. What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, it's always instrumental to keep a guy who has that level of hate. Where are you going to find another guy like that? I mean, I, of course, hoped for a complete change of scenario, with the return of the Shah, because, of course, there is a long tradition. It will make Iran great again in the real sense of the terms.
Totally.
But unfortunately, that is really up to both Trump and Israel. They seem to want to keep the Shia in power, a little bit like keeping Kim Jong-un in North Korea. It's like you keep these figures of great hate because they become almost a parody on themselves, but they become also focal points for saying, we need to be careful because, this is, you remember the famous axis of evil, it was, so it's almost like you need the enemy. And so you construct the enemy. And that is sad, but unfortunately, the military industrial complex seem to strive on that kind of approach.
Yeah. Well, all the way back to Bush, he basically had the axis of evil, and he said, Assad needs to go. He said Saddam Hussein needs to go, and Khomeini needs to go. So all of them, or not Khomeini, but who's the
Saddam Hussein? No, sorry.
In Libya.
Okay, Gaddafi. Well,
Gaddafi, right?
You see,
all of them are gone now.
Yes,
all of them are gone now.
That party, let's say, both in Iraq and also in Syria now, because Syria also is a demonstration that I discussed here before the regime change, how the situation in Syria was very balanced between different minorities of Islam. And then now instead, what do we have? We have Sunni, who are, though, Al-Qaeda and ISIS recycled terrorists in charge, just simply putting a jacket on doesn't change you. And they go after the minorities. And of course, at one point, Israel was forced into intervening to protect the Druze. Now, I explain in this book very much the Druze element, which is not really, and their connection to Freemasonry, their connection to Israel. And so if people want to understand a little bit of what is going on in Syria, they should maybe get this book, which is, of course, as you know, Islamic Freemason and the secret society behind the eternal conflict in the Middle East, because it is an eternal conflict, but it also a conflict, like I explained in my book, that the West requires in order to strive, because they don't want a prosperous Middle East. That's the sad reality.
Well, that's where they're getting with letting Iran run around all over the place. You know, with Shia, those guys just create hate and discontent and keep the wars going. Everywhere that I went, it was the Shia that were the Iranian Shia were the ones the problem.
Yeah. One thing that is also, you know, when after the 7th of October, the whole world was united with Israel because something really terrible happened that is equal to what happened here on 9/11. If Israel was genuine about fighting Hamas, you know very well they could have done a job, a very clean-cut job within a week or two, instead of then carrying it on for years, because now they are becoming simply, you know, it's like they are the Sabbatean Frankists who let the 7th of October happen, who are behind the scenes because they are the ones behind the foundation of Israel from the very start. They are the ones who now want the Jewish people hated by the rest of the world. So it's just, we don't find any solution here, because, I mean, they're getting actually what they wanted. Yeah. It's like every day anti-Semitism levels are going back, up to a level we never saw before in the Western world. So this is really sad, but I think that people need to, even in this case, have a profound understanding and not simply get the propaganda that they're fed and then becoming themselves hating, you know, anti-Semites or anti-this or anti-that. There is always a reasoning behind all these events. And so that's why I'm very happy that we have all these viewers today and all the people that are following you, and that they are, in a way, somebody has just mentioned the Order of Malta, where one of the figures that was in the Epstein book, which connected Epstein to the Pope, which I mentioned earlier, is actually the delegate of the Order of Malta to the Italian Republic. I mean, we're talking here about the leadership of the Knights of Malta. Jeffrey Epstein definitely was very much involved with the leaders of the black nobility, like it happens typically for all the Sabbatean Frankists. So I'm very, very happy that you gave me the possibility today to go so deep into all
this. Wow, very good. Man, I mean, we could go down these rabbit holes quite a bit. I remember King.
It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. And especially if they bring clarity for the people, the folks who are following us today, and they will follow us probably also in the days ahead, because I'm sure this video is going to get a lot of views. Remember that we are constantly being manipulated towards a narrative, but we shouldn't accept the narrative. We should be a little bit more, you know, thinking what is really happening.
Outstanding, here. Yeah, that's what I say all the time.
And I pray for, of course, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, because anyway, he remains our president. But I mean, it's obvious that here some compromises are being done, and those compromises cannot be accepted, and people like us have to be outspoken about it. I mean, so I mean, to be coherent with what we have discussed for years. Otherwise, you know, we become simply the mouthpiece for the propaganda coming out of the White House, and that is not the case. The filter needs to be always your brain, not the brain of somebody else, and especially the brain of the people in some psychological operation battalion that are dictating what you think. I think, Michael, you agree with that, no?
Oh, yeah.
So God bless you guys, and we see each other for another digging deep in the rabbit hole like we did today.
Fantastic work. Thanks, Leo. So we'll
see
you next time, and everybody, you know, go. We got all down in the description. We got all of Leo's work. Please, support him. We'll see you guys next time.
Take care, guys. All the best. God bless America and God bless the world.